Okay, well for today I'm going to get back and start working on the deck. And that's quite exciting because I can get to try out this beast of a belt sander, which is the 1200 watts 6 kilogram Triton belt sander, which I've not really had a chance to use much of yet, and I'm quite looking forward to getting the chance to use this on the deck. One thing I need to be very careful of, last time or a couple of weeks ago I was just trying this out and I plugged it into the shop vac and it just took off at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Basically with the shop vac you've got two settings. You either switch the vacuum cleaner on or you put it in the second setting, you plug your tool into the vacuum cleaner and then the vacuum cleaner only activates when you switch your power tool on. So that's exactly what I did. I put it to the second mode, I plugged this cord in and then off it went at about 3 meters a second down the deck. Fortunately I got to unplug it before it went over the tow rail because that would have been the end of my belt sander. It did actually bend this sort of tuning screw as it hit the side. If you're wondering how fast a belt sander can go, or even wondering how fast a belt sander can go with a man sitting on it, take a look at this video, which is hilarious. I'll just put the link down the bottom in the description, or I'll use one of these cards if I can. But anyway, that gives you an idea of how quickly these things can move and how important it is for them not to be switched on in the lock position when you plug them in. Okay, well, let's get started with that. Right, well I finished my day today, just as the rain's come in to welcome me on my long journey back home. It's been quite a good productive day. I guess I spent a solid 8 hours sanding down the deck, and I'm pretty pleased with the progress I made. Basically I used that Triton belt sander for most of the work. That was really effective. Obviously it's taking off a lot of material at once. And then I went over areas that the belt sander couldn't get to, where the deck might have been a bit uneven, using the orbital sander. And I guess that was probably about 20% of the work. Maybe the belt sander I used for about 70% of the area, and then the orbital sander probably 20%. And then the last 10%, say getting into the tow rail or against the cabin top, I used the oscillating tool with the sanding head. So between these three pieces of equipment, I guess I got the deck done in about 8 hours. Now there's a couple of issues that have come up, of course. The first issue is that you might remember the whole strategy of planing the teak off and lifting it off gently with a heat gun and a scraper tool was I wanted to leave as much of the gel coat intact as possible, which I have because most of the gel coat is intact. But the problem is there's cracks through the gel coat, which I believe is due to water sitting between the teak deck and the gel coat. And these cracks are quite deep. In fact, in some places they go all the way down to the substrate. Now the second issue that I found is a lot worse, unfortunately, and that is basically rotted core, which I wasn't expecting to see at all. My understanding that the Hallberg-Rassys had this sort of honeycomb plastic foam type fillet in the core, which meant that even if that got a bit wet, at least it wouldn't rot. So I'll show you what I found. During the process of sanding the deck, I came across this. So what we're looking at here is a cutout for an air vent which goes in the forward cabin. We're just between the hatch and the anchor locker there. As I was sanding around this, I noticed that there was a gap between the two layers of deck, the top and the bottom. Not only that, I was able to actually put my finger into this gap. And then what I found is this sort of soft mush, and sure enough, that's all rotten plywood. Now it was relatively dry, but it was just virtually powder. And I put a screwdriver in there and sort of got a fair bit out, and as you can see, just pushing this cable tie in goes back about 8 inches or so. So I'm assuming that they've actually put a piece of ply, you know, under this area here to strengthen the deck, give it a little bit more stiffness perhaps. Because this area of the deck, there's not really any bulkheads or support. There's a bulkhead back there, and there's a bulkhead where the anchor well is. And I guess, you know, people are walking in this part of the deck to get to the foredeck, and maybe the plywood is to just give this a bit more stiffness. So that's very, very disappointing. It's adding a whole new layer of complexity and a whole new project to the deck, which, you know, I was hoping to get finished pretty soon. So I can't go ahead and do any more preparation for the prefab teak deck until that's taken care of. So the first thing to do is to identify how far back that plywood goes, and then how much of that is rotten, and then cut out that piece, lift it up, dry out whatever's left, and then start measuring up to put a new piece of wood back there, and then obviously relaminate that piece. So I'm going to leave it there for today, and hopefully when I get home there will be a moisture meter which I ordered a while ago from Amazon. You might remember there's that crack along the tow rail. Well, that part is still quite wet, and I want to get my own moisture meter so I can start monitoring that drying process. So I guess that's come at the right time, because I should be able to come back tomorrow and use that moisture meter to try and see if there's still damp in the core. So anyway, I'll come back and start that tomorrow. It's probably enough for today, and need to have a beer after this bad news and think about what additional work that's going to give me, and how much time that's going to add to this project, and perhaps how much cost this is going to add to the project. I'm actually a little bit depressed, and I've been set up here for the last 20 minutes trying to work out what to do. And I kind of regret buying this little device now, because wherever I seem to put it on the deck, I get this. That's the sound of something telling me that my deck is saturated. And either this isn't working properly, or my deck is well and truly rogered, because just about everywhere I put this I get that sound. I mean, there are some parts of the deck that are okay, but in general, the closer I get to the tow rail, ultimately I get that. So, you know, I've got a wet core, which means that there ain't going to be any more teak being laid on this deck for a while. I just sort of did a vacuum round to clean up, because I was just so despondent by this news that I didn't really know what to do, and sometimes just vacuuming, cleaning up, tidying sort of helps me get my thoughts together. So I guess I need to break it down. I've got a wet core. Parts of that core that are wood or plywood, as I've seen on the foredeck there, that's a fairly big problem, because it means that that material is no good now, and therefore it needs to be replaced, which means I need to cut off the deck, lift it up, get to that rotten wood, dry it out, replace it, put a new deck back on. But for the other places where there's not plywood but just that foam, perhaps the foam has stood up to the water okay, and doesn't need to be replaced. I mean, perhaps, I need to see. And if that's the case, I don't need to lift the deck up, but I do need to find a way of drying out that core. And I think before I go ahead and start ripping everything up, I want to try using some of those heated silicon mats. And I saw the guy on Sail Life do it the other day, and it looks like a really good idea. And I'm thinking, if I can get something like that and do a test on the deck where it's showing high moisture, you know, vacuum it down, and perhaps, because there are so many holes in the deck, fortunately I've not filled them up yet, maybe if I put a heated mat on with a vacuum seal, that'll actually heat that top layer and also draw air in through all those screw holes, and maybe that will get through that core and help to dry out the core. Now obviously that involves going out buying new bits. I'd need a vacuum pump, I'd need silicon heat mats, I'd need the heating controller and thermostat and all that sort of stuff. That'll take a while to get there. So I think just to try and focus on what I can do today, I think I'll leave the tow rail. My intention today was to come up here and cut open that tow rail and lift that off to dry. I think I'll leave that because, again, if I'm going to use this heated mat, maybe that's the solution there. But what I will need to do regardless is still find out on the foredeck where that plywood finishes, so that I can mark out on deck the part that I need to cut off to lift up, and then I can start looking at making up some new ply or whatever material's best to refill that core, which at the moment is basically nothing. There is one last hope to cling on to. Maybe this is broken and has not been calibrated correctly. Right, so to check that, I've asked Anthony to bring his moisture meter in and I'll compare it side by side. Maybe this is broken, that would be quite nice. But I've got a feeling deep down it's not broken. And, maybe the first thing we should have done is got one of these meters and gone over every square inch of the hull, the top side and the deck, and sort of understood what it is I'm dealing with. So everywhere you can see a W, that's where there's wood underneath, and everywhere you can see an F, that means that there's foam underneath. So with those readings, I kind of narrowed down where the timber might be. And this was actually quite a good one here, because you can perhaps see that this is right on the end of the timber. You can see the timber there and the foam there. So that's the delineation of the foam and timber. Just quickly, it looks like hardwood. It doesn't look like ply. That remains to be seen. So just with these samples here, I've drawn out where the perimeter of the timber must be. And so now that I can see where it is, I can work out where I'm going to cut around it. It's a little bit surprising because it's not quite symmetrical. You can see it's kind of more on this side. And also, I expected it to run all the way down towards the hatch, because I thought it was here to stiffen the entire foredeck. But given that it's sort of offset to this side and runs up to the ankwell, I'm wondering if it might actually be a support timber in anticipation of people putting electric windlasses here, perhaps. So maybe it was just for that purpose. Okay, but at least I know what I'm working with, where it is, and what I need to cut around. Well, that went much better than expected, which is just as well because I was just beginning to feel a little bit outside of my comfort zone, particularly getting the saw out to cut through the deck. I was a little bit uncomfortable with that, starting to feel a little bit overwhelmed by everything. But fortunately, that went pretty well. The deck came up in one piece, which is good because I'd like to recycle it and just use that again rather than have to laminate up a new piece after. So let's have a look at what that looks like now that it's been taken up. That's what it looks like. It's actually quite neat. This foam is in like little cubes. You can see there's a pattern there of 1-inch cubes all the way around. Some of it's stuck to the skin, and then here we've got this rock timber. So as you can see here, there's just nothing left. This was just all, dust basically, and this is all very soft as well. Might actually keep these plugs and put them back. I don't know if that's the right thing to do or not, but I won't throw them out yet. As I said, I want to reuse this I want to be able to just glass this back in and not have to re-laminate the whole area. There's a couple of screws that have come in through the headliner, I think. All right, so I'll do a little bit more cleanup of this, and then I can look at what I'll need to do to put something back. Yeah, I'm pleased with that. I'm pleased it came off in one piece. That's good. Okay, well, I think I'll leave the update here at this point because there's a lot more thought and investigation needed to be done before I can continue. So this is probably as good a point as any to leave it for the week. So by the next update, hopefully I would have had time to look around and source what the options are for getting some heating mats. And if that's affordable and feasible, then I'll probably look at using those to try and dry out the deck. I'll probably ask around and get some advice from other people as well to see what the options might be. And then I might just have to divert to some other bits in the meantime whilst I'm waiting for that to be organised. So I can flip over to start working on the cap rail, you know, order up the timber and start to template that. And I think there's just a little bit more work to sanding the deck. I'm going to get a Dremel tool so that I can get around into that seam against the toe rail and get all that remaining silicone out. Okay, so next update, I hope to show you all of that, and I should have a approach agreed on what I'm going to do to dry out the boat, which is, as I discovered today, very, very wet. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.